So we're going to look at the insert statement, which is insert into SP. The first thing that we might do is insert a set of values corresponding to a set of columns. The guys at the back do insist of talking while we go along, which is beginning to be a little bit annoying. Now we have insert into SP, so we have a series of columns, S number, P number, and quantity. Then values S6, P1, and 100. They do correspond, so that means that S6 will be inserted into S number, P1 will be inserted into P number, and 100 will be inserted into quantity. So in this case, we have specified the columns and the values. On the other hand, if we are like there, going to insert into every column, we do not need to specify the columns. The system will understand we want to insert into every column. So we could just say insert into SP values S6, P1, and 100. Because we're inserting into every column, we don't need to specify the columns. They're optional. If I were to insert into only some columns, for example, if I say insert into SP, S number, and P number, then I need to insert the column names because I'm not going to insert into all of them. So I need to specify to the system the correspondence between the values and the columns. So I have to then say S number, P number, S6, and P1. Okay? And note that when you're dealing with literal strings, you need to use the column, the single column, to specify that this is a literal string I'm dealing with. I don't have to do that for the numbers. So the numbers don't need don't need commas, but the literal strings do. What happens now in the third statement, where we haven't inserted anything for quantity? Well, with that insert statement, what will happen is a null will be entered, because we haven't specified what. And that will be okay, providing we have defined that column to accept nulls. If we said not null, then that insert statement will be rejected, because we're trying to insert a null into something that should not take null values. So also, alternatively, if we have indicated there is a default for quantity, that will be inserted. So if there was a default, that will be inserted. If there was no default but it admits nulls, null will be inserted. If it didn't accept nulls and there was no default, then the insert statement will be rejected. We all happy with that? So we might also want to, instead of having to insert by giving the values, copy the values from one table to another. So we might want to insert data that we copy from another table. So if we want to do that, we can use still the insert into table name, and then a column list, which is optional. If we insert it into every column, we don't have to give it. But if we don't, then we might want to give it. And then we have, instead of the word values, we have a select statement, which selects the data that we're going to insert. Obviously, the data that we select has to correspond with the columns we're trying to insert into. So I could then have a select statement, any data which corresponds to the column list from whatever tables. So for example, if I have an empty table which I'm going to call summary, which I've already defined, and that is going to contain for every part the total part number that was shipped for that part. So I could then say insert into summary, and I have two columns in summary, the part number and the total quantity, and then what I'm going to insert is provided by the select statement. So I'm going to select the P number and the sum of quantity, so that is using an aggregate function, from the shipment table grouped by P number, because I want to count the total parts per P number. So if I do that, I then insert by using a select statement. And clearly, there has to be a correspondence between the columns in the summary table and the columns that I'm going to select to insert. Then I can do it. Are we all happy with that? Fabulous. So, if I want to, for example, select part 7 in a table, but there are no shipments for that table. So if I say insert into summary part number total quantity, as I was just doing, select P number some quantity from shipment, group by P number. If P7 was not in the shipment table, that is not going to be inserted. If I want to capture it, then I have to write a slightly different select statement, because this statement there is not going to enter any part for which there is nothing in the shipment table. So if I wanted to capture those, I could extend my select statement and say insert into summary part number and total quantity, and then I can select two sets of tuples. Remember that the union, I used to put the results of two different queries together. So I can say select P number some quantity from SP grouped by P number, which is as I was doing before. But now to collect those parts that didn't have any shipments, I will say select P number and 0, because those parts that don't have any shipment, the total summary is 0, from P, where P number is not in select distinct P number for shipment. So that will select all of those that don't appear in the shipment table and insert them into my summary table with a 0 next to them. So I can my select statement can be more complex than as complex as I want it to be, providing that the results that I feed into the insert are the correct results. There's a correspondence between the columns I'm selecting and the columns I'm trying to insert. Are we all happy with that? So if I did that and I had the P7, then it would appear in my summary table with the 0 next to it. Do we all understand so far? So the next thing that I might want to do, once I know how to insert data in a table, is to update a table. The general table, so that means that when the data already exists in the table, I can modify it in some way. So for that, the general format is the update. And I have update table name, set column name equal to expression, column name equal to expression, so I can update more than one column at a time, as many as I like, where optional search conditions. If I don't have optional search conditions, the update applies to every row in the table. If I have optional search conditions, the update only applies to the rows that meet the particular condition. It's a bit like a select statement. So if I want to update all of the rows, but only individual columns, I could say, for example, update the parts table. So I need to give update, the table I want to update, and then the column that I am going to change. Set weight equals to weight multiplied by 2.2. When I said before to you we could do in the select part of the statement weight multiplied by 2.2, I said the underlying data did not change. This time the underlying data does change because I'm doing an update to it. So this changes the database permanently. And it will mean that the weight will no longer be the amount that we had, it will always be now multiplied by 2.2. If I want to do a specific rows on more than one column, I can then say update P, set weight equal to 25, color equal to yellow, so I'm updating two different columns, and I could have a weight condition. So only for the parts that are equal to some value. So that means I'm not updating all of the tuples, I'm only updating the tuples that meet that condition. In that case, there's only one part that is going to have P2, so I'm only going to update one tuple. So I can update individual tuples, sets of tuples, or all the tuples, depending on the condition that I use. Are we all happy with that? See understanding faces as I look across. I have to assess if you look puzzled or you look like you're understanding. So what if we want to do something like set shipment quantity to 0 for all suppliers in London? I could use in the condition, I could use a sub-query. So I could say something like select update SP, set quantity equals 0, where London is equal to, and then I have a select statement to provide me with the information. So I have where London is equal to select city from S, where sp.snumber is equal to the s.snumber. Now, remember that now in the subquery, I am trying to match to the shipment table. So that is why I provide this kind of matching condition, where I say the S table here, the S number, has to match the S number in the shipment table, which is the outer query. So that is going to match my tuples, where the supplier is London, from the supplier table, and from those where there is a match, the shipment table, which is the one referred to in the outer query, is going to be updated with the quantity equals 0. Are we all happy with that? If you know, then ask. and we could try to explain further. Okay, so that's your update for you. The next thing we might want to do is to delete data that exists in the table. So we have seen how we insert, we've seen how we update, so how do we delete data that exists in the table? The general format is delete from, you give the table name, where you can have optional search conditions, much like for an update. So if I want to delete all rows in a table, which is slightly dangerous, I can say delete from P. That deletes all of the rows in table P, so beware. If you say delete from P, it means delete the whole entire table, every row in the table, because there's no matching condition, so that's going to affect every tuple in the table, every column. If I only want to remove a specific rows, I could then have a condition. So I could say delete from P where P number is equal to P2. That is only going to delete for me those where there is a match between the P number and P2, so it's only going to delete one row. Okay, so I could have any search condition. I could also have a search condition like I had before for the update, made up by a subquery. So I could say select from shipment where London is equal to select city from S, where SP, which is the outer table, dot S number, is equal to S, which is the inner table, dot S number. So this is going to delete all of the rows where the supplier city is London, because that's what the subquery is doing. Okay? So I can delete all the rows, I can delete the specific rows given a certain condition. Are we happy with that? So, once we have done something like a deletion, what does actually happen? Well, SQL, and we're going to have a lecture on transactions, which I might teach, or it might be done if it's here, has a sort of transaction mechanism. And when we talk about transactions, what we talk about is a logical unit of work. So everything that is packaged as a transaction, every statement that is packaged as a transaction, either completes and gets committed to secondary storage, or the whole thing gets rolled back. So that is what the DBMS has to monitor. It has to monitor the transactions because they are defined as a logical unit of work, which should either execute altogether or should not execute at all. What you don't want is for something that is defined as a transaction to have one statement that executes and the rest of the transaction doesn't. So if something doesn't execute within the transaction, all of the changes of that transaction should be undone. So you have the database in a consistent stage all the time. So you start from a consistent stage, you execute the transaction, everything that forms part of the transaction gets then committed, and that means that the changes are permanently written to the database, or they are rolled back. So when we work in transactions, we either commit a transaction or roll back a transaction. Now, generally speaking, when you start an SQL statement, it begins a transaction automatically. And as you enter to execute the transaction, it commits the transaction. But you can't take control of transactions. If you specify begin at the beginning of the transaction, then you take control of the transaction. And it won't commit until you specify a commit statement. So then running the transaction won't commit it. You have to specify the commit statement to commit it to the secondary storage, to make the changes permanent. On the other hand, you could execute it, and if something goes wrong, you could roll back, and that means you go to the beginning of the transaction. So the changes that the transaction make are not permanent. Some environments have this thing called auto-commit, which can be set on or off. So normally it's set to on. If you set it to off, then it means you have to commit every transaction manually. Some systems do not work like that. PostgreSQL uses, as I said, a begin statement. So if you use the begin statement, it means you are effectively taking control of transactions. You then have to execute the commit statement for that transaction to be committed. So if I have something like that, I have a shipment table and I have a summary table that I've defined. And then I say, insert into shipment values S3, P4, and 1000. So I'm going to update my shipment with a new shipment. And at the same time, to maintain consistency, I want the summary table to be also updated. Because if the first update takes place but the second doesn't, then the database will be in an inconsistent state. The summary table wouldn't reflect the data that is in the shipment table. So I'm going to have to package those as a transaction. If I do that, then either they both will commit with a commit statement, or they could be rolled back. But the transaction will make sure that they commit, depending on what you put at the end of the rollback. So if I do that and there's a problem in between, all of the transaction will be rolled back to the beginning, or if I get to the commit and everything has worked, then it gets committed, both things get committed to secondary storage. So if I have a commit, a statement that ends the transaction, making the changes permanent. So that means that they will be written to secondary storage and they will be part of the database state. If I have a rollback statement, then the transaction is aborted. So any changes that have been made to the transaction are rolled back to the beginning of the transaction. And I no longer will be able to see those changes. If I'm working within a programmatic SQL, so let's say I'm writing a Java program and I'm accessing the database, if I have the successful program termination, that will commit all of the statements to the secondary storage, providing that is a successful termination. If, on the other hand, there is any event that causes an error, then it will automatically roll back the transactions that are being executed at the time that haven't been committed yet. So programmatic SQL, either you successfully finish, in which case the transactions get automatically committed, or you terminate in an error, in which case the transactions are automatically rolled back. And you cannot nest transactions with other transactions. So if you start a transaction, you have to commit a rollback. You cannot start a transaction within a transaction. They cannot be nested in that way. Are you happy with that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now, as you are happy with that, you can tell me what the answer to those things are. Let me find a pen that works. So if I have something like that, so the first one says, amend the details of parts produced in Paris. The new color is blue and the weight is increased by 5. So how do we do that? What will be the SQL for that?
Update.
Update, because we're talking about changing something, so we need to write an update statement. What's the next thing? Yeah, the part table, so we have to say P, because the next thing is the table name that we want to amend. And then, what else? Set, because we use that to define what we're going to do to a particular column. Color equals blue.
And weight equals weight plus 5.
Yeah. Weight equals weight plus 5. Because in this case I want to increase whatever is there by 5. If I do that, that will happen to all of the parts, won't it? So that will affect every part. Is that what I want to do? No? So what do I need?
Where Paris equals select city.
Yeah. I mean, since the city is not the city of the part, so we're looking at parts produced in Paris. So we're looking at the city which is in the parts table. So it's simpler than that. I can say where city equals Paris. When I was using the subselect before, I was doing it because I was looking at a different table. But this time, the information that I want to check for a tuple is within that table, so it's as simple as this. So I can just say where city is equal to Paris. So that means this is not going to update all of the tuples. It will only update the tuples where this happens. Okay, so that is the first one. The second one says, oh, I took out my, because it uses too much space in my file, so I don't have my copy thing. So you have to move forward. So the next one says, the lead supplier is 5, But before you delete it, to ensure referential integrity, update all shipments of supplier S5 to be supplied by S7. Both operations should be part of the same transaction. So I have to do these things together.
I'm sorry, I left a word divider in here.
So these operations have to be part of the same transaction. So I want to delete supplier S5, but before I do that, I want to make sure that all of the things that were supplied by S5 are now supplied by S7, so there is a valid reference for the supplies. So how do I do that? I now want to define my own transaction because I want to do more than one select statement in the same transaction. So how do I take control of transactions? Begin, yes? So if I want to take control of transactions, I need to specify that I am now taking control of transactions with the begin word. And that means that now I'm beginning a transaction which will end when I issue the commit or the rollback statement. So now I am controlling this transaction. What is the first thing that I want to do? Update, yeah. First of all, I want to make sure that I update. I want to update. Where is it? All shipments of suppliers to S5 supplied by S7. So what I want to update is the shipment table because I want to change the shipments that were supplied by S5 to be supplied by S7. Yeah? So I want to update SP and then set S number equal to
S7.
S7.
Where?
Because I don't want to do this for all of them. I want to do it for only some tuples. So I now need a where condition where
S number equals S5.
S number equals S5. That is it. So that is going to go and take all of the suppliers that had a supplier of S7 and is going to make them S5. And what do I do now?
Delete S7.
Yeah. Now I can delete S5, knowing that, sorry, no, it's not going to quite be like that. It's delete from, I'm going a bit fast, from
S5.
S. You have to say delete from table where particular condition. Yeah. At the moment, if I say delete from S, I'm deleting all of the suppliers, which is where I know what I want to do. So I want to say delete from S.
Where S number equals S5.
Yeah. Where S number equals S5. Because I want to do a specific tuples. And then, what do I have to say? Commit. Because if I don't say that, then the changes won't happen, won't be committed to the database. So some transaction may or may not see them, depending on how they are set to read the changes of other transactions. But they're certainly not written to the database as yet, until I say commit. Now, if I haven't put this into a transaction, if this executes but this doesn't, then I have a problem because I've done one part of what I wanted to do, but not the other. So now I have a bit of an inconsistent state, because I've changed all of the suppliers, but I haven't deleted S5. So if I want to make sure that those things happen together, I have to package them as one transaction. Then I take control of transactions. In fact, if I can do that, so if I have here my, so I have my begin statement, and then I want to say update SP set. I've done this before, so I have to see where we are. Hold on. So this is the suppliers that I have at the moment. So I have an S5 and an S7. So let me see what I have in the shipment table. S1, S2, S3, S4, S5. Okay, so let's say that I now want to send those that are, let's do it the other way around, because now at the moment I have shipments on S5 but not on S9. So let's say that I want to update shipments, set S number to be S9, where the ship number is S5, right? Then I want to select from shipment to see what happens, and then I want to commit that. Now, if I do this, right, and I run that part of the query only, I look at what is in the shipment table, and what I see is it seems to have made those changes. But I haven't finished my transaction, so in fact these changes are not committed to the database yet. They are temporary changes. I haven't aborted and I haven't committed, so this is an ongoing transaction. And at the moment I haven't done either. So if I now went and said, at this point, give me the word because I've forgotten it. Sorry? Rollback, that's it. My brain is going. So if I now say rollback, and I now select from shipment, I should see that actually the changes didn't happen. So I'm back to S5 because I've rolled back that transaction. So those changes haven't actually been committed to the database. And when I issue the rollback statement, whatever has been done so far gets rolled back. If I do it the same again, but this time...
Wouldn't you just replace commit with rollback?
Yeah, so I am going to... Now I'm going to do the same. Okay? So if I look at it again, it appears to have been done, and now I am going to commit my transaction. And now I can look at the table, and it will now be committed to storage. So now these changes have been made because I've committed my transaction. So my transaction now has finished, completed, and it has made those changes. But before I hadn't committed it or aborted it, so I aborted it, so I went to the beginning again. So the changes didn't happen. Okay, are you happy with that? Yes?
Then be taken back. Is there any facility to take it back again if you got all correct?
No, if you have already committed a transaction, you then have to redo what you did with the new select statement. So now you will have to issue a new update statement because those changes have now been made. You cannot unroll it anymore. Instead, you could then say update S9, set it back to S5, but you need to use a new update statement because you have committed those changes. So now it requires a new change to change it. Whereas before, because my transaction was ongoing, I could just roll back and that would have been undone. But once I've committed, there's no way to roll back. All I can do is do something that reverses whatever I've done, which would be a different type of SQL statement.
Why do you have to roll back? Can't you just abort since you haven't committed anything?
Well, rollback is effectively abort.
Okay.
So rollback is the way to abort in a transaction. So that makes everything go back. And what generally happens is you might have a transaction which is a complex process. Halfway through something goes wrong, and then you want to be able to roll back all of the things that a transaction has done. I mean, normally you want to commit it, but if there is an error in the execution of the transaction, you want to be able to roll back. And that means all of the things that are in process will be undone. Equally, if you are within a program and there is an error, you will automatically roll back.
So normally you would execute manually like you just done now?
Normally, you take control of transactions when you want to do this, but you will do it normally within programmatic SQL more often than not. So if you do it within programmatic SQL, what happens is if you have a problem with the program and the program aborts in a condition that is not normal termination, every transaction that is ongoing will be rolled back. If on the other hand you have a proper termination of the program, then they will be committed. And if anything goes wrong before they commit, then they get rolled back. So because that guarantees the kind of like that the database will always be consistent, because it's consistent before you apply a transaction, and it should always be consistent after you apply the transaction. So the transaction has to leave the database in a consistent state. Are you happy with that? So let's have a break for 5 minutes.